The Conservative and Unionist Party is the current ruling party of the United Kingdom. It has a long and fascinating history, being the oldest political party still in the UK's political system. But how did it originate? How did it evolve over the years? And what does this tell us about the future of the party? All these questions will be answered in this video. It originated as a political faction in 1679 as a reaction to the first Earl of Shaftesbury's proposed bill to exclude James, Duke of York, and heir to King Charles II's throne from the line of succession because he was a Roman Catholic. At the time, the Conservative Party was not yet established, however their nickname, the Tories, has its roots in this crisis, which will later be known as the Exclusion Crisis. The Tories sided with the Duke but lost to the Whigs, who opposed the bill and were the opposition party at the time. This is one of the reasons why the King of England, and now the United Kingdom, cannot be Catholic. This left the Tories in political oblivion for a while, up until 1783, when William Pitt the Younger became the youngest ever Prime Minister, at 24 years old. Pitt, despite not seeing himself as a Tory, certainly encompassed a few of the traits that would define the party, such as being physically responsible and tackling the national debt. This influenced other prime ministers to do the same, such as Lord Liverpool, who focused on balancing the budget after Britain won the Second Napoleonic War. But it wasn't until Disraeli that the Conservative Party came to be. When Disraeli became Prime Minister in 1868, he passed the Second Reform Act, proposed in 1867. The Second Reform Act enfranchised urban voters who met the property requirements needed to vote, but in real terms, this only meant factory owners and other businessmen. Disraeli managed to unite the base of landowners and these new urban voters with nationalism. This is where the unionist part of the name comes from, but isn't really said nowadays unless it's a formal occasion like an election. Towards the end of the century, the Marquis of Salisbury succeeded Disraeli and continued his conservatism, but is far more known for his mastery of geopolitics, overseeing the height of the British Empire. But with regards to growing the Conservative Party, he managed to take a faction of the Liberal Party, who had replaced the Whigs, because of a divide in Gladstone's Irish Home Rule Bill in 1886. Salisbury seemed to have put the Conservative Party in a very favourable position going into the 20th century. However, things were about to get rocky for the party. During the lead-up to the First World War, the party was embroiled in political infighting under the leadership of Arthur Balfour, particularly over protectionist economic policies such as Joseph Chamberlain's tariff reform and constitutional changes such as the 1911 reform to the House of Lords. During the war, they formed a coalition with the Liberal Party to help the war effort, and after the war, dominated the interwar period, being the largest party in all but 2.5 of the years leading up to the Second World War. They did have to deal with the effects of the Great Depression, which hit Britain especially hard during the 1931 sterling crisis, when the Bank of England tried to become independent again and remove the gold standard. They also had to deal with the rise of fascism in Germany and Italy, which I'm sure you all know about. But if you don't, well, I don't know, go watch Star Wars or something. You'll get the gist. Now, throughout the interwar period, there was one man who encompassed the entire conservative ideology of the time. And I'll be surprised if you know him, because he doesn't really get a mention nowadays. It's Stanley Baldwin. Yes, Hoi4 players. That old man at the start of every Hoi4 game that retires is actually a significant individual in British history. Who'd have thought it, eh? Anyway, he was the Conservative leader from 1923 to 1937 and had 3 prime ministerial terms. In his first term, he pursued protectionist economic policies. In his second, he cracked down on striking workers. And in his third, he started rearming the nation against the growing fascist threat. Now, why could such a long-serving prime minister be so overlooked? Probably because his successor turned out to be a bit of a goof, and waved a piece of paper in the air and was like, "Oh, I saved the world! Oh, go me! Hitler wouldn't lie to me, guys! He gave me his word and agreed to write it on this piece of paper! See, guys, it's written down! Whoa!" And then, well, you know. To be fair, Chamberlain was a more unifying figure than Baldwin, and only resigns after the German invasion of Norway, but he's still a goof. I said it. This guy, though. Winston Churchill. Inspiring speeches, witty remarks, giving the middle finger to Hitler, starving India. No way. We don't talk about that part. Churchill is the most iconic British Prime Minister in history. Churchill has had a complex relationship with the Conservative Party. He wasn't particularly trusted by his peers, and he himself thought that traditional parties would collapse at the first sign of crisis, and a new political order would form. Churchill was also a fan of making a coalition government, as that was his preferred style of governance. At times, he was at odds with the party, such as when he lambasted Chamberlain over the Munich Agreement, based, and when he voted with Labour over the Ministry of Supply issue. However, when things looked bleak, the party turned to him for leadership, and well, you know the rest.
Wake up! It's 1945. The war's been won. Churchill's a hero. And there's an election. Churchill's thinking this election's gonna be easy. The results are in. And he lost.
Labour won that election under the leadership of Clement Attlee and set up the post-war consensus. You see, Churchy, the British people at the time wanted a change from the and Attlee provided that. But the Conservatives realised this and adopted it as well. But what is the post-war consensus? Good Benny boy, you've been paying attention. The post-war consensus is a bipartisan agreement on a range of social, political and economic issues, such as a Keynesian economic strategy, a mixed economy, and a Beveridgean welfare state. It lasted from 1945 to 1979. And there are a few notable Conservative leaders during this time, such as... Wait, I'm gonna see if he's still there. Hold on. Hey! Churchill! 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 Churchill!
Churchill!
Here you are. Yeah, you get a second go at the top job, but you're largely inefficient and do most of your work from your bed. Your good old friend Sir Anthony Eden succeeds you though, but he's more remembered for pissing off Eisenhower because of the Suez Crisis. Oh, and his domestic policies were left to Rab Butler.
Who?
He was the Chancellor of the Exchequer for Sir Anthony Eden's government, of course. There was one Conservative Prime Minister that, at least in my opinion, did amazing. Harold Macmillan. Oh my god, he is easily the most underrated Prime Minister in our modern history. Like, god, dude. I love this man with the passion. Macmillan famously said to the Queen that he could only keep the government unified for 6 weeks. But he made that 6 weeks last 6 years. Damn, what a unifying leader. During that time, the economy was in good shape. He re-established the special relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States. He sped up the decolonisation process and distanced himself from South African apartheid with his Winds of Change speech, and was a significant diplomat in the signing of the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, getting praise from both the United States' President John F. Kennedy and Soviet Union leader Nikita Khrushchev. Listen, if you could get both these guys to say you're cool, you're cool. His prime ministership ended after a host of scandals in 1963. The most famous of these was the Profumo affair, when Secretary of State for War John Profumo engaged in an affair with 19-year-old model Christine Keeler. And he lost the 1964 election, and the Conservatives wouldn't get back into power until 1970, under Sir Edward Heath. But Harold, he did a pretty good damn job. Speaking of good old Ted, Ted Heath is known for two major historical events. The miners' strikes of 72 and 74, the second of which resulted in electricity being limited to 3 consecutive days, and the United Kingdom joining the EU. Which, wouldn't be controversial in the party or in the country at all. We'll get to it. Heath's economic and social policies were the prelude to an ideology that would come to define the Conservative Party under a certain prime.
Meanwhile, in the House of Commons in the spring of 79. Well, hello, Leader of the Opposition, Margaret Thatcher. Well, hello, Prime Minister James Callaghan. Must suck being on the losers' bench. Shut up! I can do a far better job than you. You rule the country with your inflation, and now there's bivouacs everywhere because of the winter discontent, which is when multiple trade unions went on strike over pay disputes over the course of a very harsh winter. Hell, even the dead weren't being buried. You're doing an awful job. Well, you can't do a better job than me. Now, why is that? 'Cause you're a
Thatcher became Prime Minister after winning the 79 election. She campaigned on reducing inflation and cracking down on the trade unions. And she succeeded at both by the next election in 83. Inflation was reduced from a height of 16% in 1980 to just under 5% in 1983. Thatcher appointed Norman Tebbit as Employment Secretary, who set out to rip the trade unions of their powers. Flying pickets, who were trade unionists that would join a picket line and cause disruption, even if they had no connection to a particular factory or mine, were banned. Trade unions couldn't just call for a strike anymore. It had to be voted on by its members. And Tebbit implemented a policy called the closed shop, which outlawed it being compulsory to join a union if you were to enter certain professions. However, these policies came at a great cost. Thatcher tackling inflation resulted in a deep depression in 1981 and caused unemployment to rise to 3 million, hitting manufacturing jobs particularly hard. And this should have ruined Thatcher's chances in the 1983 election. But the Conservatives won a landslide victory, by no small part from the Falklands War. In 1982, the Argentine dictator Leopold Galtieri invaded the Falkland Islands, which Argentines call Las Malvinas, to gain public support and to compensate for his poor economic policies. This backfired horribly when Margaret Thatcher sent a naval task force to retake the island, and the islands were retaken just after 3 months. This is why Margaret Thatcher has the nickname the Iron Lady. Reputation secured. Callaghan, stop with the sexism. But can it get better? Oh yeah, it can. Inflation was low, unemployment was decreasing, GDP was rising year on year, interest rates were low, more council houses were being built, and housing prices were gradually creeping up at a sustainable pace. Thatcherism was working. But what is Thatcherism? Thatcherism is a form of neoliberalism. What is neoliberalism? An ideology that advocates for deregulation, privatisation, and spending cuts. Silly. See, Betty boy, this deregulation and privatisation will give businesses, and particularly efficient businesses, the freedom to gain a higher market share, since the space occupied by public services will be fair game. And because we don't have all these expensive public services, we don't need to pay for them, so we can focus on balancing the books. And during the mid to late 80s, it was all the rage. Unfortunately for Thatcher, the 80s, sworn enemy. The 90s! Yeah, that came around and she resigned. Primarily over the controversial poll tax, which is a single flat rate tax on every adult that was widely unpopular and was abolished after a few years of implementation. Despite her resignation, though, the party continued with her vision under the leadership of Sir John Major. So, you know, Maggie, not all bad. The 90s weren't the best times for the Conservatives. Even though Major won the 92 general election, his government saw record low opinion polls, particularly after Black Wednesday, and saw a host of scandals. Black Wednesday is when the government had to remove the British pound from the ERM due to a collapse in value. This was followed by a recession that hit the Conservative base particularly hard. And he had to deal with scandals such as David Mellor engaging in an affair and accepting free holidays from the Palestine Liberation Group to Abu Dhabi, and Defence Minister Jonathan Aiken lobbying arms deals with the Saudis. The irony was, Major campaigned on a policy of back to basics, which focused on returning to traditional family values. This decline led to a huge defeat in 1997 to Tony Blair's Labour Party. After this defeat, the Conservatives floated from one unsuccessful leader to another, until jackpot! It's him. David Cameron formed a coalition government with the Liberal Democrats in 2010. At the time, there was great economic turmoil as the country still had not recovered from the 2008 financial crisis. He decided to undertake an austerity program intended to reduce the budget deficit and government spending. This resulted in an increase in inequality because housing prices skyrocketed, the pound severely depreciated in value, GDP growth stagnated, but UK share prices increased, which only benefited those with capital. It was under Cameron that a certain wing of the party came to the limelight. Immigration had increased, and this was of great concern, particularly to this man, who when I first saw him in 2014, I thought he looked like a frog. This man is Nigel Farage. He was the leader of the UKIP party, and to anyone who doesn't follow UK politics, that party is the UK's far-right party. And there's nothing the Conservatives fear more than competition for their base. So someone had to do something about it. Cameron had to do something about it. Cameron made a manifesto pledge saying he would hold a referendum. But only if I won the next election. Okay, so we won the 2015 general election, with a majority this time, and held the referendum in 2016. Cameron campaigned on the Remain side and thought, there's no way Vote Leave would win, right? Right? He resigned shortly after. The referendum kinda destroyed any legitimacy Cameron and his government had. Cameron wasn't particularly popular in the lead up to the referendum anyway, so there was always going to be a change in leadership. However, most pundits and political commentators commented that the Conservative leadership was a poisoned chalice. You know, because they may have campaigned on the losing side. Kinda awkward. Theresa May decided to drink from it, and well, I mean, she promised to hit net zero by 2050, so that's something, right? Yeah, I agree, she was largely ineffective. This was mainly down to the Brexit negotiations, which kinda went as well as you expected, as not even the country knew what type of Brexit they wanted. And to anyone who was like me, who didn't want to ask dumb questions because they'd look silly, I'll save you the embarrassment. Brexit means Britain leaving the European Union. It literally means Britain's exit of the European Union. Brexit. We all on the same page now? Great. Anyway, she was replaced with this man. You might know him. I think I might have seen him once getting stuck on a zip. Boris Johnson's prime ministership was nothing short of eventful. The first thing he did was he extended the proroguing of Parliament, which is like recess for MPs, for an unprecedented amount of time, so that Parliament wouldn't get a say on his negotiated Brexit deal before the Brexit deadline passes. Oh yeah, they set a deadline for Brexit. A deal had to be made by the end of the year, or Britain would leave without a deal. You know, during that time, there was so much fear about a no-deal Brexit. Anyway, he got told off for doing that by the Supreme Court. He also called a general election. Why did he call a general election? Well, because a certain someone decided that she wanted to form a supermajority and called her own election and lost her own majority and had to form a coalition with a bunch of Northern Irish. It was the same thing to do. And he won. And won big, winning a majority of 80 seats. A landslide victory. Labour were in the mud. Boris was king. Brexit is gonna get done. And then the pandemic. Yeah, the pandemic kinda defined Johnson's government. With the lockdowns, a vaccine rollout campaign, and the motto, protect our NHS, like everywhere you went, it was a fascinating time. But after the crisis, Boris got into a wee bit of bother when the public found out that he was having office parties during the height of lockdown, when loved ones couldn't see their dying relatives or attend their funerals. Yeah, not great. It was illegal at the time to have a party, and he was fined for having it. He is the only Prime Minister to be arrested while in office. He stayed on for a while after these scandals came out, but then more scandals came out. And more. And Sue Gray. And more! Until it was a little too much to handle, and he resigned. He resigned in July of 2022, which meant leadership contest! In the red corner, graduating from Lincoln College, Oxford, with a net worth of £730 million, it's ready for Rishi Sunak! And in the blue corner, formerly a Lib Dem Remainer that hated the monarchy, now proud Brexit libertarian, who do we trust? In Liz we trust! Liz Truss! Truss won, and lasted 42 days before resigning. Then the party, well, more the MPs, because the following leadership election that autumn was rigged so the MPs would get the guy that they wanted, and ready for Rishi Sunak became the current Prime Minister. And here we are to the present day. It's the 6th of December 2022, and yeah, the opinion polls don't look good for the Conservatives, and the future looks bleak. But to all you Tories out there, I want to give you some encouraging words. You'll be back, and stronger than ever. See, the Conservative Party's main goal is one thing, and one thing only: winning. The Tories do have an ideology, but it's flexible, which means it can adapt to new realities. And this combination of determination and adaptability means that the party will likely survive way past our lifetimes, and will continue to be a significant part of British politics. Hey guys, thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you got a friend or family member who you think might like this video, send it to them. Sources to the information are listed in the description, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.